I'm Cherylanne Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 362 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. Why you feel like you never have enough time. So, hello and welcome to the Brilliant Balance Show. If you are a new listener, and it seems to me that we have some new listeners of late, I'm so glad you're here. I'm genuinely delighted that you have found your way to this show. This is one of my very favorite things that I get to do inside of the Brilliant Balance company, and getting to share the messages that we share in this podcast is just so fun, especially when there are new people to share it with. So I want to remind you, since I started this by saying this is episode 362, there are many, many, many episodes in the archives that you may find valuable. And I just want to tell you a little inside trick if you haven't discovered this yet. And kind of depending on how you found your way to the show, this may or may not be something that you have stumbled upon. So at the Brilliant Balance website, which is brilliant-balance.com, you have to put that dash in the middle, brilliant-balance.com, there is a podcast page. You can navigate there right from the top nav bar. And in it, the current episode is always ready for you. Like, it's always right at the top of the page and really an easy way to find it. But also, if you scroll to the bottom of that page, there is a little section called the podcast prescription. So what we built this little widget for is that if you know something that you are struggling with and you want to find an episode that perhaps covers that topic, you can put a keyword in of your own choosing, and we will try to get you to episodes that are about that particular subject. Now, there's also some starter searches that you can use, like common searches that might include productivity or health and well-being. And so those are great places to start. But if you know that there is a keyword like, I don't know, perfectionism, and you put that into the search, you're going to find episodes that cover that topic. So I just dropped that one into the search to see what would happen. And we get things like my interview with Catherine Morgan Schaffler, who's the author of a fantastic book called The Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control. There's an episode called Everything Looks Messy in the Middle that talks about progress curves. There's an episode that is my interview with Greg McCune, who's the author of Essentialism. There is an episode about starting an entrepreneurial revolution with Jessica Heron, who was the founder of Stella and Dot, and several others, all that come up just from that keyword of perfectionism. So again, whether you are looking for results about negotiation or perfectionism or time management or things around finding your purpose, like, let your creativity be your guide here, or really let your need be your guide, and just kind of put in a particular word that you're wondering if there's an episode on. And again, it's not perfect. You know, if you put in perfectionist, for example, I'm not sure that an episode that has perfectionism in the title will come up. So you might need to dance around a little bit. But this podcast prescription little tool is pretty clever, and it lives at the bottom of the podcast page on the website. So if you're, not keen to scroll through the archives and you want to find your way right to a relevant episode that you really need today, that might be a way to do it. Okay, so let's get into today's subject, which is why you might feel like you never have enough time. And I think this is something that is so prevalent, particularly for women who are at a stage of life where we're managing complexity in our lives, where we have substantial career responsibilities as well as, big, robust lives outside of work. So in my case, I have 3 teenage children and a husband. I have 2 parents who blessedly are still with me. And so, they live relatively nearby and we're very involved in their life. I have both of my in-laws still living. I have sister-in-law and brother-in-law and their children. I have friends, right? So there's a level of complexity that we're managing at this stage of life that can feel like our time is being stretched really thin. Like there's just a lot of things for us to do and not a lot of us to go around. And while I think it would be really easy to just buy into the current cultural narrative, right? The accepted story that it is what it is, and we're just going to be super busy and get over yourself, right? And we can just collectively lament this condition. I actually think there are a couple of underlying reasons that we exacerbate this situation. And if we can get really clear about what those are, we might be able to get a little bit of freedom from this pattern. So I want to unpack 4 of them with you today that you might recognize yourself in, these behaviors. I see myself in every single one of these behaviors that I am about to share with you when I look back over the last 10 or 20 years of my life, right? Certain ones kind of rear their head at certain times, and then I get them under control, and maybe another one comes to the surface. So I really want to make sure that you know that if you are experiencing these things, or if these are habits that you're in, you're not doing it wrong. And you're not, it's not like a tragedy, but there are a collection of things that you can do to create more time freedom if that is something that you want. So the first habit or pattern that I think can make it feel like we just never have enough time is when you do too much. Now, I've been talking about this. If you've been listening to the podcast for a minute, the last several episodes, we have been talking about this pattern of the tendency to take on a lot and just to really have difficulty making choices. So when we do too much, we are telling ourselves, I can't possibly disappoint someone, right? I can't possibly say no to something because someone else, or even I myself, might suffer. So I think that really we get into this loop where we just keep saying yes to every single thing that comes our way, right? And we don't want to miss an opportunity. We don't want to disappoint anybody. And so at some point you kind of open up your calendar and you think, I don't even know where I'm going to have time to go to the bathroom in the week ahead. Have you ever done that? You look at your calendar and you think, well, that's great. I am just going to be in back-to-back meetings or appointments throughout the week. And then my evening overlaps and, starts before my day has even ended. And I'm going to have to pick the work back up, and it's just going to keep repeating all the way through the weekend until you're at some sort of, 2-day tournament out of town for a kid. And it's just never ending, right? And so this notion of really taking on a lot is something that I think when we want big, full lives, we have a tendency to do that. And we have a tendency to not know where to draw the line. So this pattern of doing too much requires that we get really comfortable, maybe not comfortable, but that we start to build a level of skill in saying no, just full stop, to certain things, right? And I have done episodes over the years on how to say no, how to do it gracefully, how to do it in a way that, holds power and doesn't make you sound weak while you're saying no, that's just clear and direct and not overly apologetic, right? But when we don't know how to do that, when we haven't learned that skill yet, we can become yes people. And I think if you identify as a people pleaser, which a lot of women who I've coached over the years really raise their hand to that moniker, like, yes, I identify with being a people pleaser. That is really going to put you in susceptibility to doing too much. So I think that's the first pattern. The first pattern that can make it feel like you never have enough time is if just objectively you are doing too much. The second thing is if you are doing everything yourself. Now, at first glance, these might sound like the same thing, but they're not. The first one is really about the quantity of things that you are doing, right? I am taking on too many things. The second one is about how you handle them. So when you are doing everything yourself, this is about often, and I hate to say this, but it's true, this is often about a high need for control. Okay. It certainly is for me. I regularly tell the women who are inside of, the Bold community with me, I like control a whole bunch. I do like control a whole bunch. All you have to do is ask my husband and my children, and they will tell you that that is true. However, that desire for control and the comfort and the safety that it creates can just take our schedule underwater before we even know what happened, right? Because when you're, let's just take a home example from home instead of from work in this case. If you're looking at the things that need to be done in a day to keep your household running, and you keep saying, I will do every single one of those myself because no one else is going to do it right? They're not going to do it the same way I would. I'm going to have to redo it. I'm going to have to provide too much direction. Then the stack of things and the sheer amount of time that it takes to do them can get really high really fast. And if it's not a need for control that's driving this tendency to do everything yourself, it can also be a need not to inconvenience anyone. They're kind of like opposites, right? But they're two sides of the same coin. We can do everything ourselves because we're holding onto it with, clenched fists, or because we're so afraid that if we ask someone to do it or tell someone to do it, that we are going to make their life more difficult. They might be mad at us. They might be frustrated. They might then have a time crunch that we've been experiencing, right? It might inconvenience them. And so ultimately that collection of emotions around control and what it feels like if we try to release it, and the potentially guilt, right, that we can feel when we are making someone else's life more difficult, can prevent us from letting go of things. And we end up in this situation where not only are we doing too much, but we're doing all of it ourselves. Okay, so those are 2 of the 4 reasons that I want to talk about today for why it feels like we never have enough time. I want to talk to all my fellow business owners and introduce you to my friends at Mackie. They are experts in providing CFO services that give you the clarity and confidence that you need, not only to succeed, but to make those strategic decisions that transform your business. Listen, running a business can be stressful, and trust me, I get it. You always want more time away from work to do the things you love, but you also want more profit. And that's where Mackie comes in with their full-service financial, accounting, and executive guidance. With their Prosper for Business system, you'll have a trusted partner by your side, combining strategic planning, data analysis, and goal setting to help you grow further, better, and faster. And their results speak for themselves. Mackie's clients experience an average first-year profit increase of over 100%, and business owners report a 20% increase in time freedom. So start your journey to prosper today. Visit mackieadvisors.com/brilliant balance and book your consultation. Okay, balance builders, any chance you're feeling a little overwhelmed by your overloaded schedule? I know, I've been there. In fact, it's why I created 14 Days to Calendar Control. This is my step-by-step program where I share my personal system and set of tools to help you transform your chaotic weeks into easy breezy ones. Okay, maybe not easy breezy, but at least edited and organized. Listen, there's training, templates, and tools in there to help you get things under control quickly. Say goodbye to constant conflicts and chronic rushing, and say hello to calendar control. Curious? Head to brilliant-balance.com/calendar for instant access. That's brilliant-balance.com/calendar. Now back to the show. The third reason, the habit, the pattern that I see is you might have a tendency to overdo things. And I'm putting overdo in quotes here, right? This is the perfectionistic tendency to go the extra mile. If you grew up being told, like, if it's worth doing right? Or like a stitch in time saves 9. All these little sayings that get us to think like you really have to do something well. If you were the kid who needed the A+ or the shiny gold star, or you always did the extra credit, right? Or if you had a parent who told you like, oh, this could just be a little bit better. Those patterns can lead to, we sort of lose our governor on what is enough, right? We don't know when it's good enough and we can stop. And so we just keep doing and adjusting and tweaking and perfecting and finessing until it's midnight, right? Or it's 2 a.m. or we're working on Saturday or Sunday because it's not quite the way we want it yet. And I think this gets labeled perfectionism a lot and appropriately so, but it's really I mentioned Catherine Morgan Schaffler at the beginning of this episode. That's really where I learned this idea of adaptive versus maladaptive perfectionism. And I think when we overdo things, we are in a facet of maladaptive perfectionism. In other words, it's a skill that we've taken to the point of becoming like an impediment, right? Something that used to be good has now become bad. We found the dark side of it. So look, your ability to do things well, to turn in quality work, to do a good job, no doubt is an asset, right? I'm confident that in so many places of your life, that shows up as a real asset. But when it crosses over that line where now we're polishing the rock well past the point where it's valuable, that's where I mean by overdoing things. And it just eats up our time. And I think this one is really rooted in a low tolerance for risk, right? We're so worried that it's not going to be just right that we just keep trying to get to that imaginary finish line. And we haven't really learned how to simplify, right? We haven't learned how to draw a line and say, and this is good enough. And I'm going to move on in the interest of creating some space in my life. I'm going to have to call it and move on. So I'm often talking with people about things like time boxing in this arena. How do you set natural time limits so that, and maybe not natural, artificial time limits, really? How do you set a time limit on a task that says, I'm going to just see what happens. I'm going to, instead of continuing to perfect this, I'm going to see what happens. And maybe it's good enough, right? Maybe we start to learn that only by practicing it. So that's the third one. And the fourth one might feel a little less obvious. So, you've probably been told that you do too much, right? And you probably resist that statement. You probably have been told you don't have to do everything yourself or let someone help you. You might even have been told that you overdo things, that, you don't have to do it so perfectly. It's fine, right? You might hear that from your spouse or your partner or a colleague. But this last one is a little sneakier. And I think it really is causal in why it can feel like our time is so compressed. And that is when you don't take time to think, right? You don't even feel like you have time to think. You don't have time to pause or stop long enough to kind of assess the situation. So you just put your head down and you keep going. And because of that, this can really cause you to sustain patterns of behavior long past the point where they're useful, right? You can just keep doing something the way you've been doing it because you can't even take a break long enough or a breath long enough to imagine that there might be another way or a better way. And because of that, we lose the chance for innovation, right? We lose the chance for creativity. We lose the chance for optimization. We don't even see that like new and better solutions have come along. We just keep doing it the same way. And maybe even making minor optimizations to like what is a really outdated process. So I, for years, have been saying when something is not working in your life, you want to just press pause and kind of double click on that area and ask yourself, all right, what is going on here? If I were going to just pull this whole process apart, the way that I do this thing, could I re-engineer it in a way that was more effective or more efficient or took less time? And you will be shocked at how many things can be simplified, can be made more efficient when there's just a little bit of time and attention paid to how you might do it differently. So it's kind of like the pause and pivot idea. This is in little micro slices, right? Can you just take a minute and look at the day you're about to walk into and say, is there something I could re-engineer here that would make this run more smoothly, right? You can do that. But then on a big macro level, where can you step out of your daily grind and really think, and really ask yourself, what are the parts of my life that are causing the most frustration, that seem the most inefficient? And can I get more creative about potentially there being a better way? Do I need to bring in some outside perspective maybe? Do I need to talk to some people about how they approach this particular thing so that you can get the benefit of their lived experience and you can start to apply that to your own life? I see this all the time in our coaching circle where someone will raise a question and say, hey, I just hired an au pair, for example. I did not. This is an example of somebody in the broke program. So if they say, hey, I just hired an au pair and I'm trying to get them up to speed, who has had an au pair before and what worked, right? What were some of the things that worked? Great. All of a sudden ideas start flooding in. Or, hey, I am really struggling with carpool and how to communicate with these other parents because it seems like there's a group text exchange that goes on every night that the kids need to be driven somewhere and everybody is kind of all over the place trying to piece together the carpool. Has anybody successfully put a system in place around carpool? And there, in fact, will be really creative and innovative solutions, and not just one, but like several that people could pick from. Someone might ask a question about work, like, hey, I am trying to onboard a new team member. They're a significant leader in our organization, and we're really struggling to get them to, what I call organ adoption, right? We're struggling to get organ adoption here with this new person. What can I do differently? This is how we've always done onboarding. It doesn't seem to be working. And ideas will float in. So I think that when we look at those areas that are like from the very mundane carpool, to the more complex and important, something like onboarding a key leader, that ability to stop and say, the way we've always done this doesn't seem to be working. Is there, in fact, a better way? I just thought of another one that I think is relevant here. I have a client who needs to do a significant amount of hiring regularly. And the job that she is hiring people into is not like a very high level desirable job. She is aware that, the title that she posts it under doesn't always get her the highest quality candidates. They have a lot of options, but she needs a lot of these people in her organization. And we did a pause and pivot on this particular issue together in a coaching session and said, what if we retitled that job in a way that was equally true, but maybe had a keyword in it that was more attractive? Just that one thing. Let's see what happens. And we put it out on the same sites that she had always posted on. And the quality of candidates increased dramatically. And she was able to hire all of the people that she needed, right, in a very short period of time. So that's the power of like, if she had kept posting the same, job description with the same title and just was frustrated that it was taking so much time to have to keep interviewing terrible candidates who didn't show up for interviews, et cetera, we wouldn't have gotten to the better place. So that idea of really taking time to think and get away from the problem a little bit to reassess, I think sometimes there's a lot of creativity just waiting. So collectively, when you recognize which subset of this behaviors are you falling prey to? Are you someone who is just doing too many things and having a hard time making choices? Are you someone who is doing everything yourself? Are you someone who is overdoing things, right? Doing them too well? And yes, there is such a thing. Or are you someone who is maybe not taking time to think and re-engineer the most frustrating pieces of your life or time-consuming pieces of your life? Any of those things or some combination of them can really collectively help you feel like you've compressed time, right? It can create less constraint on your time because these things together are causing a lot of pressure, right? They're causing the hours in your day to get eaten up when you could be freeing up some of those hours to do things that you actually love to do that maybe you're not getting to at all today. So I hope that there's something in here that you recognize yourself in and some habit or pattern that it helps you identify so that you can start to break it, right? So that you can find a new way forward. And as always, if I can support you in doing that, if we can support you in doing that, please come check out what we have going on inside of Brilliant Balance from a bold circle standpoint. There is so much good happening inside of this bold community that we've been talking about for the last few weeks. We are accepting applications to that community. I'm going to keep talking about it, right, regularly. So if it is something that is intriguing to you and you're starting to hear yourself in some of these topics that I'm covering, I definitely want us to have a conversation. You can go to brilliant-balance.com/bold and get all the information about Bold, and you can apply from there. And you can also ask questions if you have questions and need to learn more. So thank you for tuning in today. That is all I have for you in this episode. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.